Coming up today, can you believe Logan Mailloux is leading the AHL in these categories? And we've got a new contract announcement and some things to talk about in a game against the Pittston Tomatoes. All right, well, we have lots to catch you up on today, Habs and Rocket fans, including some injuries that we are going to need to discuss. So let's get right to it. I mentioned the word hat trick. Well, in Laval's 3 games last week, finishing out their 5-game road trip, they had a 3-3, which is 3 games played in 3 days. They played Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon. It is one of the more grueling aspects of the AHL calendar, teams that have to endure multiple 3-3 sets throughout the season. And so Laval kicked things off on Friday night with a visit to Hartford against the Wolfpack. Now, the Wolfpack were without the services of former Laval captain Alex Belzile. He had been recalled to the New York Rangers, so they didn't have him, who has been one of their biggest scoring weapons throughout this season. And Laval kind of took full advantage, winning this game against Hartford 5-2. But it was really on the back of young forward prospect Jared Davidson, who scored his first professional hat trick. In fact, it was his first pro multi-point night as well. A big deal and a big win for Laval. Then on Saturday night, they drove just down the road to northeastern Pennsylvania, where they were taking on the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton Penguins. But on this night, it was not the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton Penguins they were facing off against. It was, yes, the Pittston Tomatoes. The Penguins, once a year, change their name to something fun that relates to the local community, and they do that hand in hand with a fundraiser. In this instance, all of the fans who attended on Pittston Tomatoes night were encouraged to bring some dried pasta and jarred tomato sauce, and all of those donations were going to be sent to a local food bank. So a very fun and very worthy cause for the Pittston Tomatoes. But for ease of talking about the game, we'll still refer to them as the Penguins. In this game, it was once again a young Habs prospect who was really making his presence felt. This time it was Jan Mysak, who had 2 goals in this game. He scored in the first period, but unfortunately, Wilkes-Barre came out to start the second period and scored 3 quick unanswered goals in the first 2 minutes of that middle frame. And despite Mysak scoring another goal in the second and Simoneau scoring in the third, Laval also let in 2 empty net goals in the third period, and they just couldn't climb back into this one. So the Penguins did defeat Laval 6-3 on Saturday night. So then that brought them on Sunday afternoon to Bridgeport to take on the Islanders. Now, this is actually the first meeting between Laval and Bridgeport this season. Emil Heineman scored for Laval towards the end of the first period, and they managed to keep the score at 1-0 for a decent amount of time. It looked like, this Bridgeport is the worst team in the league in terms of the standings. They are in 32nd place. They've had a very difficult season. And so it looked for a good amount of time that Laval might be able to come out with a second victory on the weekend and maybe take home 5 out of 6 possible points. But then Bridgeport scored with just about 7 minutes left in regulation, and the Islanders scored again in overtime. So Laval did manage to get a point out of it, but 2 losses on the weekend. And they lost a player in that game due to injury as well. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Of course, you're going to want to know, okay, so what does that mean? 3 out of 6 points on the weekend. What does that mean for Laval in terms of their playoff positioning? Well, stick around. I promise we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I do want to get to those injuries right off the bat. That injury I mentioned that occurred in the Bridgeport game, that was Jan Mysak, who had a terrific game the night before, and unfortunately, towards the end of the first period, on the last few seconds of a power play, was skating very hard up the center of the ice, had his head down, and didn't see that the player exiting the penalty box was also kind of hightailing it across the ice to get back to his bench as quickly as possible. The 2 players didn't see one another. There was a big mid-ice collision, and because Mysak had his head down, He unfortunately took this hit up high, left the game, and did not return. So we're waiting to see if he's going to be out for any length of time. There hasn't been any official word from Laval yet, but we hope he has a speedy recovery. In addition to that, Matthias Norlinder has been out with injury, and Gabriel Bork, the captain, is out again for a length of time. He'll be out for a few weeks at least. And that's another big piece of the forward lines that JFO will be without. But I did mention a new contract, right? Well, all of you Kasimir Kaskisuo fans, I want to hear you down in the comments because he now has an AHL contract to finish out the season with Laval. The Rocket, instead of deciding to re-up him with a second PTO contract, they've inked him to a one-year, one-way AHL contract, which means from here to the end of the season, no matter when that's going to be, Kasimir Kaskisuo will be the tandem goaltender with Jakub Dobeš. Congratulations to Kaz. He has certainly earned it. I'm sure it's thrilling for him and his family, but it's also great news for Laval as well. He and Dobeš have made a terrific tandem together, and it's going to be exciting to see how they work together to help backstop the Laval Rocket through these last 6 or 7 weeks of the season. So even with those 3 points that they got last week, Laval's record overall is 21-25-2, and unfortunately, that still leaves them on the outside looking in 6th place in the North Division, not in a playoff position, but they're oh so close, as you can see. And that's why every week is going to be a crucial week for Laval, but this week coming up really has a lot riding on it, and stick around, I'll explain why in just a second. First, though, I want to get to our prospect breakdown because I've got 3 players that I want to give props to this week. First off, of course, Jared Davidson scoring his first hat trick in the AHL, his first multi-point night in the AHL. He also notched his first fight in the AHL this weekend. He's just checking all the boxes off. And that has put him at 12 points on the season, 8 goals and 4 assists. I think it's terrific progress for Jared Davidson. The past month or so, we've kind of seen him start to take baby steps forward, and I think it's very encouraging. In addition, have to mention Jan Mysak. As we said, hoping he has a speedy recovery. But those 2 goals in Wilkes-Barre on Saturday night have done something for him that you might not be aware of, because Jan Mysak is not always talked about a whole lot because he's typically been a 4th-line player in the AHL. And we here have said for a long time that he has the potential to be more than a 4th-liner in the AHL. Well, Jan Mysak now has 13 goals on the season, and that has him tied for 2nd place in goals scored on the Laval Rocket. That's right, tied for 2nd place. Jan Mysak, his persistence and his competitiveness and his hard work is starting to pay off, and hopefully that continues for him. But my standout star for this week has to be Logan Mailloux. And I know that I've been mentioning Logan Mailloux a lot in this segment, but there's a really good reason for that. And this week he's got to be my standout star because he's doing some pretty important things in terms of the AHL as a whole. Logan Mailloux has 35 points now on the season, and we've talked about how he's pretty high in the points race on Laval's roster. But when you look at the league as a whole, Logan Mailloux's 35 points is the best among all rookie defensemen in the AHL. He's number 1 in that category. He's also number 1 in the category of goals scored by rookie defensemen with 11 goals on the season. Those 2 statistics alone, the fact that he is leading those 2 categories, is a pretty big deal to discuss to begin with. But let me give you one even better. Those 35 points that Logan Mailloux has on the season, he is 3rd in the entire AHL, not just rookies. In the entire AHL for defensemen, he is 3rd in points. That is not something that we have seen happen often for the Laval Rocket, for the Habs AHL affiliate, even when they were the St. John's Ice Caps or the Hamilton Bulldogs. That is a significant achievement for a young defensive prospect for the Montreal Canadiens, and it's a very exciting thing to watch happen. How many points could Logan Mailloux have before the end of the season. So no, Laval is not in an ideal spot in the standings. They have some work to do, and they are going to need a good amount of momentum heading into March if they really plan to acquire and hold on to a playoff position. And this week coming up is not going to be an easy one for them to do that, but these are some crucial games that they're going to play. They come back home to Quebec now. They will be playing in Laval for all 3 games this week, but Wednesday night's opponent, they start things off with the Hershey Bears coming to town, the Calder Cup defending top team in the entire AHL. That's their first opponent for this week. Already a tough task. Hershey is not just at the top of the leaderboard for the American Hockey League. They're on pace and on the path to actually set some new records in the AHL in terms of how much they are winning. And that's coming off of a Calder Cup championship last year. They are a very hard team to play against, and it's going to be quite a challenge for Laval to come up with 2 points on Wednesday night when they welcome them to Laval. Then we look at Friday night and Saturday afternoon. Well, guess who comes to town? It's the Toronto Marlies. Now, you remember 2 weeks ago, they had that wild 2-game road trip where they lost by 6 goals one night and then they beat Toronto by 5 goals the next night. It was a crazy couple of games. And those same Marlies are coming to town for 2 more divisional games. Toronto is sitting just ahead of Laval in the standings. This is going to be a bitter battle between these two. Not an easy task for the Laval Rocket, but definitely going to be some entertaining hockey, I think, for fans to watch the Laval Rocket this weekend. And we'll see how the prospects do. They were doing all the work last weekend, it seemed. We'll see if they can continue to do that this weekend. And listen, I know I've been talking a lot about Logan Mailloux over the last few weeks because he does keep moving forward in his development at a pretty good clip, but you don't have to take my word for it. On the latest episode of the Canadiens Connection podcast, an AHL expert came on the show to talk to Rick and Michael about Logan Mailloux and explained all the reasons why Mailloux is definitely a prospect to keep an eye on. If you'd like to hear that interview, well, you should watch this video right here, and I'll see you again next week.